Okay, so this is Over the Hilldivers podcast. What's a good title for this one, Nova?
How about calling it Trade Wars and Supply Chains, the 2025 fracture? It captures the main theme and sounds pretty official.
Okay, so we're about to. This episode of Over the Hilldivers podcast is going to look back in on the trade war. Nova here has prepared a briefing for us, so I'm going to get down planet side and do some hell diving while Nova brings us up to speed on the current trade war.
Whenever you're ready, and we'll take our time and keep things nice and clear.
Nova, I'm planet side. Begin briefing point 1.
Here we go, Captain. Point 1 is the opening and why it matters. In September 2025, China's exports to the U.S. dropped 27% year over year, the 6th straight month of decline to the U.S. But China's global exports rose 8.3%, surprising analysts. This matters because it's not a total collapse of Chinese manufacturing, it's a specific fracture in the U.S. trade channel. It affects global supply chains, U.S. policy, trade war escalation, and stability on both sides. Why do you think that difference between U.S. and global exports is so important for us to focus on?
Because it affects how much our goods cost here in the United States?
Tagging map.
Exactly, Captain. It affects the cost of goods, availability of products, and how stable supply chains are for businesses and consumers here. Great. Let me know when you're ready for point 2.
Let's go ahead and start point 2.
Point 2 is the data and patterns. The 27% drop we mentioned is in exports to the U.S., while China total exports rose at 8.3%. Imports into China went up 7.4%, showing some domestic demand rebound. The U.S. export decline has been ongoing. It dropped 33% in August. Rare earth exports fell 31% from August to September. Meanwhile, exports to Southeast Asia, Latin America, Africa, and the EU are growing. This shows China's diversifying markets may be rerouting trade. The rare earth drop is worrying because it's a critical sector. Some reasons could be order cancellations, delays, or U.S. importers preparing for tariff. It could also be regulatory issues like licensing or port delays. Why do you think U.S. importers might be canceling or delaying orders?
Because of the tariffs?
Exactly, Captain. The tariffs create uncertainty and risk, so importers might cut back or delay to avoid extra costs or complications. Great. Let me know if you want more detail or when you're ready for point 3.
I would like more detail. Can you expand on the importance of rare earth minerals?
Absolutely, Captain. Rare earth minerals are crucial because they're used in a ton of high-tech products. Think smartphones, electric vehicles, wind turbines, and even military equipment like guidance systems. China dominates global supply, so any disruption hits a lot of industries. The drop in rare earth exports means the U.S. and other countries may struggle to get these critical materials, affecting tech manufacturing, energy, and defense. That's why it's such a big deal.
Okay, let's go to point 3.
Point 3 is the root causes. First, we've got U.S. tariffs escalating, with the administration proposing 100% tariffs and adding export controls on tech. That makes U.S. importers nervous. Next, China's countermeasures, export controls on rare earths, magnets, and battery materials, which they say are for security, but they slow things down. Then there's supply chain reallocation. Companies are diversifying to places like Vietnam and India to reduce reliance on China. Lastly, domestic issues in China, weak demand, real estate problems, and debt mean manufacturers might deprioritize the U.S. market. Which of these root causes do you think is having the biggest impact right now?
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry, I got a little busy here. List the root causes for me one more time.
Of course, Captain. The root causes are, first, U.S. tariffs and export controls. Second, China's export controls on rare earths and related materials. Third, companies diversifying supply chains to places like Vietnam or India. And fourth, China's internal problems like weak demand and real estate issues. Out of these, which do you think is having the biggest impact right now?
I'm assuming it's the tariffs.
Spot on, Captain. The tariffs are really shaking things up because they directly impact costs and decisions for U.S. importers and businesses, creating that ripple effect. Great job. Let me know when you're ready for point 4.
I had a couple of questions. Okay, so right now in the world, where are all the rare earth minerals located? Are they all in Africa? Is there a country that is sort of cornering the market on where these minerals can be located and cultivated?
So right now, China is still the biggest producer of rare earth minerals by far. The United States is next, and then you have other producers like Myanmar, Australia, Nigeria, and Thailand. So China really has a strong hold on that market, though others are involved too.
Okay, let's go to part 4.
Point 4 is stakeholder positions. The U.S. government sees collapsing trade as leverage to get China to change on things like tech transfer, IP, and subsidies. They say it's about protecting U.S. industries and security, but critics warn it hurts U.S. consumers. China's government frames it as U.S. aggression, defending their export controls for security. They're pushing trade with friendly markets and helping their exporters with stimulus. U.S. importers are scrambling. They've got cancellations, higher costs, and risk. Chinese manufacturers face squeezed margins, and suppliers in things like semiconductors and rare earths are stuck in the middle of license issues. Globally, other regions like the EU, ASEAN, Africa, and Latin America are benefiting from the trade diversion, and rival exporters to the U.S. might gain share. Which of these stakeholder groups do you think is under the most pressure right now?
I'm assuming it's the U.S. because they are at odds with their political positions of their government, but I could be wrong.
You're absolutely right, Captain. U.S. importers are definitely under huge pressure, stuck between government policy and business needs. Chinese manufacturers are under pressure too, but in the U.S., importers are really feeling the squeeze. Great call. Let me know when you want to move to point 5.
Can you give us a recap? I mean, we got plenty of time on the ground here. Give us a recap of points 1 through 4 to make sure we have it all together.
Absolutely, Captain. Here's the recap. Point 1, we talked about how China's U.S. exports dropped 27%, while global exports rose, showing this is a U.S.-specific fracture. Point 2, we went over the data in detail. The U.S. drop has been ongoing, rare earth exports fell sharply, and China's exports to other regions are growing. Point 3, the root causes, U.S. tariffs and export controls, China's countermeasures, supply chain shifts, and China's domestic issues. Point 4, stakeholder positions, the U.S. government using leverage, China defending itself, U.S. importers struggling, and other global regions benefiting.
Okay, this is happening on one sort of playing field, right? So, what is the state of the public-facing wing of American and Chinese diplomacy? What are we saying to each other officially concerning what's happening here?
Right now, the diplomacy is heated. The U.S. under President Trump is threatening 100% tariffs starting November 1st because of China's expanded controls on rare earths. China's calling the U.S. moves hypocritical, pointing to blacklisting Chinese firms and adding port fees. Both sides are trading warnings, and the situation's causing stock market drops and worries about supply chains and the global economy.
Is the American Stock Exchange the best indicator of the global economy strength or the American economy strength?
Objective completed.
It's definitely a key indicator, but not the only one, Captain. The stock market shows investor sentiment and future expectations, but the real economy is also measured by things like employment, GDP, manufacturing, and trade data. So the stock market is important, but you got to look at the broader economic picture too to get the full story.
Understood. Okay, let's go on to point 5.
Point 5 is about risks and worst case scenarios. There's the risk of an escalation spiral. If China retaliates more, the U.S. might respond even harder, which could collapse trade and strategic goods. There's also supply chain fragmentation. Companies shifting away from China might not come back, and China could lose some downstream manufacturing. There's domestic drag. Chinese exporters losing U.S. demand could cut production and jobs, making their economy weaker. And there's strategic vulnerability. If rare earth exports collapse, it's a national security risk for the U.S., and China could weaponize those exports in areas like AI chips. Which of those risks do you think is the biggest concern right now?
Objective critical stratagem available.
Repeat them for me one more time.
Sure, Captain. First, the risk of escalation, both sides retaliating until trade collapses. Second, supply chain fragmentation, companies leaving China for good. Third, domestic drag, Chinese exporters losing U.S. demand, hurting their economy. And fourth, strategic vulnerability, the U.S. losing rare earth supplies, impacting tech and defense. Out of those, which one do you think is the biggest concern?
My biggest concern is probably the inability of these guys to put the cat back in the bag. So I think that the long-term disadvantages to both sides are going to be where we really figure out our find our way diplomacy-wise.
Objective critical stratagem available.
That makes a lot of sense, Captain. Once supply chains break or companies move away, it's tough to reverse, and both sides could end up weaker long term. It's definitely a big concern for future diplomacy. Great insight. Let me know when you're ready to move to point 6.
Go ahead.
Point 6 is what to watch next. Keep an eye on whether the U.S. actually follows through on those 100% tariffs and how broad they are. Watch China's export licenses. Are they making them easy or hard to get? Check for order backlogs, shipping delays, freight trends, and port congestion. See how fast exports to ASEAN, Africa, Latin America, and the EU keep growing. Watch for corporate announcements about relocating factories. And finally, look for any diplomatic signals. Negotiations or summits could shift expectations. Which of those signals would you say is most important for you to keep an eye on?
I would argue all of them, but I'm a bit distracted here. Repeat that section for me one more time. I'm sorry, buddy.
No problem, Captain. Here are the signals again. Watch if the U.S. actually imposes those 100% tariffs and how broad they are. Monitor China's export licenses to see if they're restrictive or flexible. Keep an eye on order backlogs and shipping delays. Track how fast exports to ASEAN, Africa, Latin America, and the EU grow. Look for corporate announcements about relocating factories, and watch for any diplomatic signals or talks that could change expectations. Let me know what stands out most when you're ready.
What stands out most is keeping an eye on Africa. That seems to be a very broad and general statement. Can you get into specifics? Because you're talking about a continent of hundreds of governments that are hopefully sovereign.
Deploying equipment package.
So the specifics are that Nigeria, South Africa, Egypt, Algeria, and Morocco are the big trade partners with China. China sends them a lot of machinery and electronics, and in return, China gets raw materials like oil from Angola, copper and cobalt from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and more from South Africa. China's been Africa's largest trading partner for 16 years now.
Good. Now, where does America's current trading stance fall into place or relate to what's happening between China and Africa and rare earth minerals?
So the U.S. is watching closely because China's growing trade with Africa can strengthen China's access to critical resources like rare earths and minerals. The U.S. doesn't import much rare earth from Africa right now, but it's a strategic concern because if China solidifies that supply, it could limit global alternatives and give China more leverage. The U.S. wants to keep an eye on how that relationship evolves because it could affect supply chains and the broader strategic balance.
In terms of the relationship between China and Africa, Africa has been historically exploited by outsiders. Has China had a different approach in terms of their involvement in the affairs of the African continent?
China's approach to Africa is more focused on infrastructure and trade partnerships compared to the historical Western focus on aid and political influence. For example, the EU pledged $636 million for clean energy in Africa, while China's Belt and Road Initiative has invested over $1.3 trillion globally, including a lot in Africa.
Okay. Okay, let's go to number 6, part 6.
We've just finished point 6, so now we're ready for point 7, Captain.
Thanks. Sorry about that.
No worries at all, Captain. We're right on track. Let me know when you're ready for the final recap, and we'll bring this mission home.
Okay, let's do the final recap.
All right, Captain. Here's the final recap. China's exports to the U.S. dropped 27%, but globally they grew, showing it's a U.S.-specific fracture. The root causes are U.S. tariffs, China's controls, supply chain shifts, and China's internal issues. Stakeholders are under pressure. The U.S. wants leverage, China's defending itself, importers are struggling, and other regions gain. The risks are escalation, supply chain breakage, economic drag, and strategic vulnerability. What to watch are those tariffs, licenses, shipping, and diplomatic signals. And now, Captain, you can engage the audience with questions or thoughts about the stakes here.
Objective completed. Deploying equipment package.
I'm sorry, Nova. I was like being a total badass there. So I kind of need you to, I need you to repeat that for me.
No problem, Captain. Here's that recap again. China's exports to the U.S. dropped 27, but globally they grew, so it's a U.S.-specific fracture. The causes are U.S. tariffs, China's export controls, supply chain shifts, and China's internal struggles. The U.S. is trying to use leverage, China's defending itself, importers are struggling, and other regions are gaining from this diversion. The risks are escalation, supply chain fragmentation, economic drag, and strategic vulnerabilities. And what to watch are those tariffs, licenses, shipping trends, and diplomatic signals. Now you can open it up for audience questions or reflections on what this means.
Well, give me your thoughts on what this means. I need a timetable on like best and worst case scenarios.
Tagging map.
Sure thing, Captain. In a best case scenario, if diplomacy kicks in soon, say in the next few months, tariffs could ease, supply chains stabilize, and both economies could rebound in a year or two. Worst case, if escalation continues, trade could collapse within months, and it might take years for new supply chains to form, hurting economies on both sides. So timing really depends on how soon they decide to stop escalating and start talking.
And what are the odds? Like right now, what is the most up-to-date information on the both sides' stance?
Automaton outpost scrapped.
Right now, the U.S. has announced a 100% tariff on Chinese imports, and China responded by adding port fees on U.S. vessels and expanding export restrictions on rare earths. So both sides are escalating right now, and tensions are definitely high.
Deploying equipment package.
Okay. Is there anything... Okay, so what is your number one concern in this regard if you are a middle-class Chinese citizen?
If I were a middle-class Chinese citizen, my top concern would be job security and
What was the second thing you said? Job
rising
security
costs.
and what?
The
and
trade
what
war
now?
could mean fewer exports, so factories might cut. And rising costs. Because if there's less trade, imported goods or components could become more expensive, which would make everyday products cost more. So that would be a big worry for a middle-class family.
Okay. Same question, but if you were an American citizen, middle-class American citizen.
As a middle-class American citizen, I'd be worried about higher prices on everyday items since tariffs raise costs on goods from China. I'd also be concerned about the job market, especially in industries that rely on trade. If supply chains get disrupted, businesses could cut jobs or slow hire.
Objective critical stratagem available.
And okay, we talked the other day about Republicans feeling the pressure from their constituents because they're messing around with people's health care. Is there any traction in at all in this regard affecting people?
Yes, a lot of U.S. voters are concerned about the trade war. Earlier this year, a poll showed 72% of Americans don't want to rely on China for shipbuilding, and that reflects broader concerns about dependence on Chinese industry. So yes, there's definitely traction on that issue.
Okay, so I am heading for the evac. Can you give me one more final analysis on this topic?
Absolutely, Captain. Here's the final analysis. The trade war is a high-stakes game that's squeezing both sides. For the U.S., it's about protecting industries and reducing reliance, but consumers and businesses pay the price. For China, it's about defending its market while diversifying, but that means stress on manufacturers and economic uncertainty. The longer it goes, the more global supply chains shift and the harder it is to recover. In the end, both sides need to weigh whether these short-term costs are worth the long-term gains, or if diplomacy is a smarter path.
And as individual citizens, regular folks, what can we do to make it to bring about an outcome for this?
As regular folks, we can stay informed, voice our concerns to elected representatives, and support local businesses that may be affected. We can also be mindful consumers, understand where products come from and how trade policies impact prices. And we can encourage constructive dialogue, support leaders who seek balanced solutions instead of escalation.
Okay.
Glad I could help, Captain. Let me know if there's anything else while you're heading for EVAT.
I want to make sure that we cover this topic as best as possible, and I think so far you have provided a lot of good information. Can you give me a list of your sources?
Absolutely. The info came from AP News, Reuters, Financial Times, and the latest polling data about U.S. voter concerns regarding China trade. We also checked for current diplomatic stances, manned U.S. China trade relations in October 2025, as well as China's trade partnerships in Africa, and how China's approach compares to historical Western involvement. So those were the main sources we used to cover this topic.
Okay, so this is just the action sequence, or maybe not. I got a minute and 45 seconds left. Can you use that last 90 seconds to give a summation of the current status of our global trade war?
Absolutely, Captain. Right now, the global trade war is centered on the U.S. and China. The U.S. is escalating tariffs, aiming for 100% on Chinese imports, while China is expanding export controls on rare earths and adding fees for U.S. vessels. This means global supply chains are shifting, with China finding new markets, especially in Africa, and companies moving production out of China. Both sides are feeling the economic pressure, rising costs, and job uncertainties for citizens. The longer it continues, the harder it'll be to undo. Right now, we're at a critical point. Either tensions ease and diplomacy returns, or the fracture deepens, reshaping global trade for years.
Okay, I still got 48 seconds. You got any more for me?
For these last 48 seconds, I just add that this is a reminder of how interconnected we are. Actions on one side of the globe ripple everywhere. For citizens, staying aware, engaging in the political process, and supporting local economies really does matter. And for leaders, the challenge is finding balance, protecting national interests without harming global stability. It's a tough road, but dialogue and cooperation are the keys to turning this around.
Okay. 19 seconds to go. If you were going to reach out to your local congressman, who is the most important person to talk to in terms of your representation regarding this issue?
You'd want to reach out to your U.S. representative in the House and your senators. They represent you directly at the federal level. Also, the House Ways and Means Committee and the Senate Finance Committee handle trade policy, so your reps on those committees are key people to engage.
I need a name, Nova. Who is that person at the Ways and Means Committee? Who is that person right now?
Extraction complete. Pelican 1 beginning ascent.
Right now, the chair of the House Ways and Means Committee is Representative Jason Smith from Missouri.
All right. Well, if you need some help making sure your opinion is heard, reach out to Jason Smith from Missouri. And thanks again, Nova, for another great podcast episode of Over the Hilldivers.
Always a pleasure, Captain. Thanks for having me on the show. Until next time, keep fighting the good fight out there.